Welcome to They Are Waiting for Us from Forbes Books, the podcast that explores how education can transform lives and communities, featuring conversations with change agents who are making a difference in education, from parents and advocates to teachers and leaders. Here's Dr. Lisa Andrew.
Thanks for joining me again for my talk with Katrina Stevens, the president and CEO of the Tech Interactive. We've been discussing the ways Katrina and her team are creating inspirational and impactful learning experiences for young people around the world. Katrina, one of the data points we use to gauge impact here at the Silicon Valley Education Foundation is state test results in mathematics and science of those under-resourced Bay Area school districts we talked about in part one. So if we're an educational foundation and we're providing direct services to students and teachers, is this making an impact in the broader sense across the Bay Area in state test results? The test results, even prior to COVID, are not promising. And even when you disaggregate for certain subgroups, it becomes even more disparaging. Katrina, students are waiting for us to facilitate those learning experiences that accelerate their achievement. They're showing up. What more do you think you and I can do as STEM education nonprofits towards this end of achievement?
Yeah, how do you measure impact and achievement is a complicated question, which is often also highly political. One of the things we saw in California coming through COVID is there's a recent report from the California Policy Institute, I believe, that said that over 60% of school districts deprioritized teaching science. There was such a focus on improving skills for math and English that meant that folks weren't actually focusing on science or history or any, or social studies or any of the other topics. For me, it's like finding the right balance, because we want to make sure, having been on the national policy end, you want to make sure that we have benchmarks that we're using across the country that are the same. So because that's where you really are able to evaluate and look and see, particularly when you disaggregate, are we teaching all of our kids, not just some of our kids? So there's an important role that those kinds of test scores play in the ecosystem. But they need to be also balanced with other kinds of measures. And so I spent, when I was at Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, part of my portfolio was looking at inclusive measurement. How do we actually measure the things that we care about, not just the things that are easy to measure? Measuring success in math is easy because they're right and wrong answers most of the time. And so it's a very easy thing to measure. But how do you measure things like collaboration? How do you measure things like communication skills? Even engineering skills are actually really complicated to measure. The new NGSS standards try to capture that, but there's not a lot of good assessments that actually capture these more complex skills. So part of what we need is actually a more diverse set of measurements so that we know, in fact, that we are measuring the things that most care about. At the Tech, we have 3 different buckets of work. So one of those are what we talk about Spark. We know kids need 8 to 12 exposures to something before they can even imagine themselves differently. And so we measure that particular body of work really on exposure. How many exposures are we making sure that young people, how many engagements are we? We don't feel like that those are long enough engagements to be able to actually measure learning. Whereas we have a body of work that's closer, I think, to yours, which is around building that skills and confidence. And those are longer engagements. Those are labs. Those are working in the Tech Challenge. Those are using our curricular resources in schools. Those we can actually measure, what did students know beforehand and able to demonstrate, and what did they do afterwards.
Right. Pre and a post, yeah.
Yes. And then our last body of work that we're really developing is how is getting young people, once we've got them excited, once we've got the skills and confidence, how do we get them onto STEM career pathways? And that's a entirely different measurement, which is around literally how many kids got into the programs. And so I think about measurement as making sure that it matches the goal that you're trying to do, and that one measure does not actually, does not work for all kids in all situations.
One of the comments you made earlier about believing that it takes all of us, or that all of us leveraging together to work toward building this STEM workforce for Silicon Valley, it's includes our institutes of higher education. When we can see at San Jose State, the engineering program is so impacted and I talk to some juniors and seniors, are like, well, I want to go into a STEM field. I want to go into engineering. I want to, but it's just so impacted here at the local university. How do I get into this? I mean, it truly is all of us in this education field understanding if we're producing a third grader who's really interested in computer science, and then they're actually moving to some CS work in high school, tech certification in high school, and now, they are really a great student for engineering here locally. They need to stay local to support their family, and then working with our partners there at the universities too. You need to have a space for them. How can we, help with that and move that along? I think students often get frustrated when we talk to them about this trajectory and continuum, and they aren't able to access it. And I think supporting our partners there is as important. And you and I as nonprofits, we can be pretty nimble and flexible.
Yeah.
And then, we know that the places we're supporting are very bureaucratic, and helping to work alongside to navigate that is important. I love this idea of the multiple measure. Have you also heard from some of the tech companies here that that's what they're looking for as well? You may not have, be done with a 4-year degree, but you interview and they can tell that you have these other skills and these other competencies or these. Yeah. Have you encountered that as well when you've talked with the tech companies here locally?
Very much. I mean, this idea of moving to competency-based education, but also competency-based qualifications. So there are many organizations that are now spinning up, certifications and of different kinds. And some companies are actually really good at being able to know how those stack up. But a lot of them are also just struggling. They don't know which ones are high quality, which ones aren't. And so we're kind of in this moment where I see this emerging, but we don't have the full infrastructure in place for companies to be able to know, like, okay, if somebody gets a engineering degree from Stanford, they know what that means. But they don't know what this set of 7 or 8 competencies and certificates add up to, and it takes a little bit more time to be able to sort that out and to be able to do that. But I see us on the verge of it. I mean, I see more and more folks creating these platforms that are able to evaluate what these competencies look like. One of my secret missions is when I think about, so one of the things we're working through is like building out internships and mentoring programs. And I'm seeing this as a bit of a Trojan horse, because when mentors from companies start working with our kids, they start to realize, wow, this kid has a lot of talent, and I would love to have this kid on my, coming into my company. But the way I measure kids coming in, or the way that we're structured and set up, would have missed that child.
Yes.
Yeah. And so when you have people in companies being able to start to recognize that, then they start pushing and going, we really need to look at this because we're losing some talent that we would have been able to get. So again, my secret Trojan horse of being able to change the companies by having them exposed to our kids.
Well, sign me up for that ride. I'll definitely get on that secret mission with you, because I agree. It's like, again, access, right? It's giving the tech companies access to these brilliant minds and these creative minds, right?
And coming back to that, when because you and I are both working in Silicon Valley, there are literally a significant number of billionaires and millionaires that are in this region. But 45% of our kids live below the poverty line. So there's huge disconnect between, and I think it's particularly hard when kids see all this wealth. They see these companies literally across the street from them, and they don't know how to get there. And I think what work you and I are doing is like, how do we actually make that bridge? How do we make sure they have the skills, the confidence, but then also the access?
Yes.
And I feel that huge responsibility given the level of access I have at the tech with my board, with our community. How do I get that social capital so that my young kids are able to access that? And I mean, you and I both believe that one of the biggest ways to be able to change the whole trajectory of a family, generational change, is through economics.
Yep. Yeah.
And so that's how we can show really get success in the region.
Absolutely. Okay. We're going to switch gears a little bit here, go to another part of your diverse resume around educational technology integration. And I know, Katrina, that your background includes some pretty deep work in educational technology integration. And some would say that the world was thrust into technology integration during COVID. We were thrust into that. And being a nonprofit, that is not overly burdened with bureaucracy. My organization was able to pivot very quickly and provide STEM learning experiences for students, which is what we're supposed to be able to do as a nonprofit. What impact do you think the need to transition to online learning during COVID had on moving educational technology integration forward?
It's it's a question that everyone is kind of looking at right now. One of the things I am most proud of, the work that I did when I was in the Obama administration, was something called Connect Ed and Future Ready. So one, Connect Ed was really around making sure that all schools had access to broadband. And we went from something like 30% of schools having that to close to 90% when I left. But the Future Ready part was the part that I ran, which was really around how do you get districts ready for that? So yeah, you got broadband, but how do you use it?
Right.
How do you sustain it? How do you build your budget around that? How do you do teacher training and resources? And so I worked with 3,200 superintendents in their districts. And one of the things that I was blessed to have is like a number of those superintendents or folks in those districts when COVID hit said we were ready. And so they were able to shift gears pretty quickly. And so you don't know what the work you're going to do, the impact that's going to have, but that was a moment when all of those districts were in a very different place. One of the things that uncovered, and it was something we knew, but I think it was something where people paid a lot more attention to that, was really this kind of digital divide and digital use divide. So even though all schools might have flipped the switch, didn't mean that all kids had access to that at home. The first time we were actually talking about broadband at home as being a utility and something that's necessary. So COVID did that. Like that was something we thought was 20 years away from. And so suddenly you're seeing that in all these bills around making sure that kids have access or families have access at home, that's an essential part of someone's life. But it was an interesting moment for us because within days of COVID, the days of us closing, we had put up two new websites. So Tech at Home and Tech in Casa. And so it was around getting all of our resources available and up and running for people to be able to use at home and using really easy to find resources. We also, our Tech Challenge, which is our big showcase, our engineering showcase every year, was a few weeks away from, and so kids have been working for months on their projects. So we partnered with Zoom and we're able to move that online. And so to have kids participate. And it allowed us to experiment during COVID of those virtual showcases and what did it look like to run these programs online. We shifted gears and did online field trips. And then we blew up on TikTok. So our kids are like having these robust conversations on TikTok about data science and poverty. So we tried a number of resources. Again, we didn't have the same kind of weight that schools were having to do. So we could be more nimble in a very different way than schools really were having to struggle during that time period. Now, as we're coming out, it's like, which of those things actually are kind of post-COVID? Virtual field trips, for example, aren't as much. That way, schools want to come back and be in person. We had a program that was called Book a Biologist, so we're expanding to Book a STEM Ambassador, where basically you can get a STEM professional to Zoom into your classroom. That is still actually in high demand, and now that all schools have Zoom infrastructure or some kind of capability similar, that is taking off. And our other kind of education resources are also taking off. Us being able to do the Tech Challenge online meant we had kids participating from Pakistan and Alabama and around the world. That led us to being able to launch in Kenya, and in person. So there were a lot of opportunities, and part of it was just figuring out which of those are opportunities that are still going to last and are going to stick with us.
Yeah, I see our school districts asking these very same questions. Now, I have some superintendents that are like, wait, the kids are having way too much screen time. So tech integration went like, bam, teachers are holding on to it. And now it's like, as you said, which are the good practices or best practices to keep in tech integration, and which ones do we need to go back to the face-to-face, the in the moment, and the live, and really trying to it's like a great experiment going on. And then you have all those varying abilities of our workforce in teaching. They had to learn, now they're still learning, or they really, love being a part of this. So I'm wondering that were any of the challenges and opportunities we faced during COVID, were those being discussed in the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Educational Technology when you worked there?
Oh, very much so. I mean, one of the big ones we talked about was actually the homework app. which was that now we have broadband access in schools, but kids don't have it equally at home. And literally seeing children, in cars outside of McDonald's, just getting to use the Wi-Fi. So that huge shift. And we also talked about the digital use divide, and this played out as well even during COVID, meaning if you were from a higher socioeconomic school district, you are most likely using digital tools to be creative. You were creating your own podcasts or your own videos or your own presentations, and you were creating. If you were from a lower socioeconomic, you are more likely to be doing rote practice. And so even when we had digital use, if you just looked at the usage across the way, it would look like, okay, we've got it more equal. But even like how those tools got used, it's still being perpetuated. So that's going to be a much bigger, because that's around teacher training. That's around really thinking about kids differently, and recognize that all kids are capable. All kids deserve those kinds of more creative experiences using technology.
Yeah. So it sounds like what I hear you repeating a few times is it was really about now being able to have broadband and access in the home. And that is going to be the, perhaps, I don't know, greatest accomplishment of this really horrific time. And there's parts of that I'm almost thinking I agree with, in that it gave the whole family access to now the whole world of the internet. So it's not just about the education of the student, but it's just about access to jobs and information and healthcare and all those things for the family.
One of the places where that was the most transformational is, and it's actually very complicated to get broadband onto reservations. Some of them are state, federally recognized, some of their own. And so there's complicated who gets to put in, who maintains it. When we brought technology and that broadband access to a reservation, which is often isolated from the rest of the world, it meant that people could stay in their community. You mentioned that earlier. People want to stay with their families.
Right.
And to be able to get education, or even to be able to do jobs, now that some jobs can be done virtually. So it can be transformative for a family, and it can be transformative for an entire community.
Right. So looking a little bit more to the future as we're speaking, you also worked on the National Education Technology Plan during your time at the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Educational Technology. How have the recommendations from that plan been implemented? That was a while back, and so have you seen those recommendations implemented? And I guess a second part to that is, are they still relevant? Are those recommendations still relevant?
Yeah, and the National Education Technology Plan gets updated every 2 to 5 years.
I see.
So it's, the idea is that technology changes so fast that that's continue getting updated. And there's work being done on that right now for the new version. It is unevenly distributed. So one of the complications of the United States and the way we're functioning in education is that it is primarily local. And their responsibilities that the state has and their responsibilities the government has. And the federal government has to be very, very careful not to step on those things that really belong to the states. So the National Ed Tech Plan is not a plan where you could just go, like, everybody has to do this. So the hardest part of it was actually convincing 50 different states and then 15,000 districts, 100,000 schools to be able to adopt some of the recommendations that were in there. So it is designed to be really practical and to be able to kind of pull out each section and work on the pieces of it. There was a lot in there around just shift in teaching and learning. How are you making this more student-centered? What kinds of questions that you're asking as you design than necessarily like this is the exact design of what a school should look like, because context matters. You do need to design for the kids that you're serving and where they are and the needs that they have and the opportunities that exist for them in their region. So yes, a lot of those recommendations, I see lots and lots of districts. I saw some states actually just adopt the whole plan, and be able to use it. Actually, a foreign government adopted the whole thing for their entire country. So I was like, well, that would have been a lot easier for us to do.
Thank you. Thank you, United States.
Yes. There are pieces of that were also forward thinking, and starting to make nods around what does it mean as VR is coming in, any kind of extended reality, what does it mean as AI and data science, and making sure that we are, as education is able to keep up with the changes that are happening in the world. I would argue that the existing curriculum we have right now is just significantly outdated. And I know we're looking at this in math, even in in California, but you're much more likely to need the concepts of computational thinking and data science than you are calculus. When you think about like across the board, and it's hard when you talk about bureaucracy. Education is a very hard ship to turn, particularly because it's really a whole bunch of little towboats that you're all trying to get to move in the same direction.
There's this constant tension between local control, context, the elected school board who represents those people, and that balance between, we have this national plan, it's based on these sets of recommendations of questions to ask in your context, right? And how do you apply that? This whole sense of all students, and how do we get access and opportunity for all students, but still have local control and context. And what is needed. You said a foreign government adopted this plan. Well, geez, that's even a foreign government. And yet folks within our own United States aren't embracing the plan. I feel like there's this constant dance between, my community needs this and I want control over this. And then this ability, as you were saying, the national assessment, which then can be compared to other nations, and just where that all plays out, and how do we prepare. It's not even about the nation. Here in California, here in Silicon Valley, we have a street can divide a district that gets $24,000 per student, and this district gets $10,000 per student.
Yep.
That exists today in Santa Clara County. So this idea of I love this, that the plan, the education technology plan, gives you a set of questions that you can ask in your context and in your purview of local control. However, please ask the questions.
Yes,
right?
Exactly.
Ask the questions. Don't say to yourself, well, that's a national plan. Please ask yourself these questions and do what you can to apply this so that we can create that workforce. Good to hear that it's updated, and I do hope folks listening to this will look into it and check it out. So as we wrap it up here, just a little bit from you about what are some of the current or emerging challenges or opportunities in the field of education technology that you're passionate about or that you're really interested in.
We're having a moment where we have a number of emerging technologies. And so what I'm passionate around is these are going to happen. Like AI is here. It's not going away. VR is here. Augmented reality is here. All of these technologies are here, and environment. I'm particularly interested in, because I don't feel like we do this well enough as a field, is to identify dosage and what kinds of tools. So there are some things that that a VR environment is the perfect place to learn, because it's a really complicated concept and it's hard to wrap your head around it, or that you get access to something you wouldn't be able to do, or that it's safer. Like if you're learning how to do, you're already seeing this in companies where people are getting trained on how to do more dangerous activities in a VR environment before they go into a real environment. But that doesn't mean that we should use VR for everything. Same thing there are some things where it makes the best sense to be sitting around a room and having a conversation, or working in small groups, or working with your hands. And so there's opportunities now for us to be able to figure out what's the right amount of each of these technologies, and when are they best able to help kids, rather than just like, hey, it's a cool tool, and let's find some opportunities for that. I also AI is a really complicated conversation at the moment, partly because most of the world doesn't know what AI is. So we've got a whole range of, when you say AI, someone's thinking of a cyborg from a sci-fi movie, and someone is thinking about a simple algorithm, and it's that whole range. And so we don't have good vocabulary. And I think it's really critically important, particularly at this moment, for us to be paying attention to how does AI get created, making sure we're thinking about how we're training our education system, one, to be able to create AI, but two, to be able to understand it. And there's a moment right now where if we don't pay attention to what data sets the AI is using, it will eventually just start training itself, and it'll be really, really hard to get the bias out. I'll give an example of one of the grants I did when I was at Chan Zuckerberg. I was approached by, because they wanted to redo a contest that was about creating an algorithm. The original competition was around, actually for the SAT, it was around automated, scoring for writing. And what I said was, and I brought in a couple other funders on this, is we can redo this, but one, you got to change the title. It can't be automatic scoring. Two, so we called it the feedback prize. And so you have to spend an entire year before you even develop the algorithm talking to teachers, talking to the teachers' unions, understanding what they need, what they want, what's helpful, what exists, what doesn't exist, before you develop the algorithm. The contest itself was actually pretty short. And, it changed how how that contest was structured, including adding a second version for ELL. And so really talking about how you're using it to support a teacher, not replace a teacher.
Right.
And it's a tool, and making sure that in the design that you're intentionally thinking about how are you getting the most representation. And even in terms of the data sets, making sure we were getting student essays from all over the country, not just one step, one state or a handful of things. That can make a huge difference. And one of the other tools I really loved is an organization called Soapbox Labs. This is around voice recognition. So we had originally, for one of the grants, had a different group. But Soapbox Labs, which is out of Dublin, is very intentional about getting voices from the entire world. And so sampling English, now they have other languages from all different dialects across the world, and making sure that they were getting children's voices. So children have a different cadence, they have a different pattern. And so I have a lot more confidence in when that technology is used, that it's actually going to represent and be able to help kids from all different backgrounds. So it's how these tools get created makes such a huge difference in terms of the bias that gets built into them.
Yeah, great. Wow, I'm going to definitely check that out. That sounds really interesting. So as we finish here, Katrina, if folks wanted to connect with you or find out more about the Tech Interactive, where would be the best place to look?
Yeah, so our website's the best place to find us. And it's pretty simple, thetech.org. And then you can always reach out to me, which is kstevens@thetech.org.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I have thoroughly enjoyed talking about STEM and the future of STEM and the excitement of STEM, and I really appreciate you taking the time to chat.
Lisa, I appreciate coming on. I always enjoy conversations with you.
Same here. And that wraps up this episode of They Are Waiting for Us. If you've enjoyed the show, please take a moment to subscribe so you can get notifications when new episodes drop. Also, if you could spare a minute, I would greatly appreciate it if you could leave a review to help others like yourself discover the show. Thank you, and be well.
This has been They Are Waiting for Us. If you want to learn how to create economic opportunity through equal access to quality education and create an extraordinary learning environment focused on everyone realizing their full potential, go to drlisaandrew.com. They Are Waiting for Us is a production of Forbes Books.